Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jin Han and this is lecture 3 for marriage and family therapy. Okay, we left off last week about how the abandoned toddler rescued by the wild dogs grew not as a human but almost acting like a dog. So it is important to know that early child training, which is parenting, is the most important learning for any human being because there's a critical period for a human to learn a language and also develop cognitive development. And a lot of scientists believe that it happens from birth to 2 years old. And after 2, it might be a little bit more difficult to not only learn the language, but also learn all the proper behavior as a human being. And as you know, most wild animals, even after they are born, they're able to survive, most of the wild animals. But then for human, it takes years of parenting, caring, feeding and nursing, and also coaching and teaching for human to really learn how to behave properly. So human needs a lot more tender care. And there has been many experiment that was done about human brain, and now we know that human brain not just grow individually and the brain doesn't grow alone. It's a holistic approach, holistic growth, which means as your body grows, the brain grows together. So you cannot just teach your child to just learn something by just teaching. Actually, it's the whole body grows with the brain. And that's why a lot of people believe that you need to spend time with a child. There was an experiment that was done with the Chinese orphans who were raised in orphanage, even from infancy. And even though this orphanage had a very nice staff, and also they had a really good modern, very decent facility and all, because they were still short-staffed, the infants were not able to have decent amount of human contact. Only time they will see human is when they're being fed. So as they were growing up, they realized these infants had a low IQ, you see? So a childhood training and parental love is the most important environment, and it is one of the most important factor in human development. So when I say environment is pretty much equal to time, it means the time that you spend with someone, the time you spend with something will influence you, and it becomes your important influencing factor, okay, as an environment. So when it comes to nurture, you have to always monitor the time that you spend with someone or something, okay? And another important factor for human growth is that the early childhood environment, early childhood time spending with something or someone is most important factor. So after you all grown up, okay, you could still change some habits and things, but ultimately it's the early childhood memories that dictates your whole behavior. So that's why I study marriage and family, to learn about how to do good marriage and parenting, because I realize counseling takes a very long time for someone to get healed, but prevention is a better method. So my specialty is actually premarital counseling and parenting. That is my focus, so that I will not waste time trying to heal someone after all the damage is done. If I could raise up healthy couples with a healthy mind, healthy spiritual life, and healthy marriage, then they could raise up healthy kids. It's a pretty obvious deduction, right? Obvious principle. So that's why we should focus more on how to be a healthy person and marry a healthy person as well. Have a healthy marriage, then eventually you'll have a healthy kids, right? Because the kids will be influenced by the most important person in their life, especially when they're infant and toddler, which is mom and dad. Okay, let me move on to the birth order right here. Okay, birth order. There are many books on birth order, but Dr. Kevin Neiman, who wrote a New Birth Order, he's a Christian psychologist, and his lectures are funny. He's such a funny guy. So I like his book because there's a lot of humor in it and very practical. And according to his book, he says, over time, parental attitude, circumstances, and relationship may change. So the firstborn doesn't really experience the same parents as the youngest child or the 3 children in between. So if you have 3 kids, all your children, they will have a different parenting from you, because you will grow, you will change, you will evolve into a hopefully better parent. Then the kids will experience different parent as they grow up. So even though this is not an exact science, there's some issues and problems, obviously, because I would say this again, that psychology is not an exact science, it's pretty much statistics. So that's why we have to be very wise in terms of using psychological theories and principles, because it may not apply to every one of us. There's always an exception. This is not math. This is not science. It's more of a human science. Human behavior. So according to the book, he talks about very typical 3 children's personality: firstborn, middleborn, and the youngest. So firstborn is a typical personality types, and like I said, there's always an exception. So you have to be flexible in terms of understanding this. So for the firstborn, the time and encouragement the parents give the firstborn may increase her desire to achieve and receive praise, but it also may raise the pressure to succeed. And more pressure, higher expectation, she must set a good example, right? She or he. And the rule for behavior may be tighter and stricter than the younger siblings. Because when a young couple have their first child, obviously their expectation is very high, and also they don't know any better. So they have an unrealistic ideal dream about their child. So a lot of times their point of view may not as exactly right. They're always kind of higher, elevated perspective about their child, because it's the first one. Everything is new, everything is interesting, even though they don't know any better, so they make a lot of mistakes, but still they're excited. They have tons of energy because they're younger and they want to raise a child in the right way. So they'll do whatever they can to raise them right, but at the same time they make a lot of mistakes along the way. So you have to realize that there has been a long-term experiment about this firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, this birth order theory, and sadly some scientists and psychologists believe that after long-term experiment, it doesn't always right. This theory is not always right, and I do agree. It cannot be 100% accurate all the time, because each family has their unique situation. So even though this may apply to certain families, it may not apply to other families. Okay, and yet one thing they find pretty accurate is about the firstborn being the smartest, okay, compared to the younger siblings. And they puzzled why the oldest are smarter than the younger one, okay? If you are watching this and if you are the oldest one, maybe you agree or disagree, okay? But according to the statistic, most of the time, firstborn have a higher IQ than younger siblings. And why is that? So there's a theory, okay, why firstborn is smarter, and you may wanna jot it down. It's not on the note, okay? If you are single or if you are newlyweds trying to have a baby, you should pay attention to this, okay? So there are two things they suspect that contribute to the higher IQ of the firstborn. Number one is firstborn usually have more stimulation, okay, from the parents. I'm not talking about, electric shocks as a stimulus. No, I'm talking about taking them places, spending time with the firstborn, and constantly take them out and things. Take them out to the amusement park, or they take him to museum, because now we know, as I mentioned earlier, the human brain grows together with the body. So this is a holistic approach. Holistic growth. So the infants who are busybody, constantly moving and curious, their brain activities is stronger. So they tend to have a higher IQ because they're curious. They're constantly observing, looking at things, and it stimulates their brain waves. You see? Just like that. When the newlywed couple have the first child, they're more enthusiastic, they have more time, and they're younger, they have more energy. So they tend to spend more time with the firstborn. And also because they don't know any better, it takes longer time to do anything for the baby, like changing the diapers and trying to get something for the child, like getting the toys and things. And because of this inexperienced issues, actually they sometimes spend more time, and they're always excited about just having a first child, unless the child giving them so much problems. A lot of parents, being the first parent for the first time, they will excited and they will take them places and try to do a lot of stuff. But as soon as they get second and third, and if it's more than three, obviously they just don't have the time, okay, to deal with each child. So first thing is stimulation, and second thing is expectation. Okay, if the expectation is too unrealistic and too much to handle, then the child will crack. Okay, and you don't want to do that. But right amount of stimulation is better than neglecting or just not spending time with the child. You see, right amount of expectation help the child to have the motivation to achieve something that parents expect him or her to achieve. So right amount of expectation is helpful, we found out. So that's why firstborn usually have higher expectation than the second one and the third one, because of the many reasons. But a lot of times, because it's the first one, they have a high expectation, okay? And sometimes they're unrealistic, and by the time they get second one and third one, their expectation gets not lower, but then more realistic, and they become more free from childbearing issues. So that's why firstborn are smarter. First, stimulation. Second, expectation. Okay, let's move on to the second child, the middle child. Okay, according to many different studies, middle child may be a mediator or one who totally avoids conflict. Oops. Okay, you went too far. Okay, it could be shy and quiet or friendly or outgoing. I mean, they go one extreme to the other and may be independent but extremely loyal to a peer group and may feel squeezed and become a rebel. Okay, why is that? You see, they're in the middle, and most of the time, the first child gets all the attention for being the first child in the beginning of his life or her life. And then when the youngest came along, youngest get all the favor from the parents because it's the youngest, and they get all the fun stuff. And parents are very, very, very loose with the youngest. And the first one very strict, and the middle one they don't know what to do. Okay, and they're torn. And sometimes they become a typical black sheep of the family. So they feel like they're not getting the love that he wants or she wants, just like his older brother who get all the favors, and also the youngest who becomes the cutest person on his family. And parents are very, very lenient with the youngest one. So they feel like they're treated unjustly. So when they become a rebel, what they're trying to do is they want to change things because they're not happy at home. Okay, they feel like they're mistreated. Okay, they didn't get the love that they needed. So according to many different studies, okay, there has been many cases of middle child become a rebel, especially one of the bloodiest revolution in the human history was the French Revolution. And it is kind of interesting that the people who started the French Revolution were all middle children, and they were fighting for the injustice, but at the end, they killed everybody, even each other. Okay, that's how it actually stopped. So anyhow, so you need to be nice to middle children. They might have a lot of scars, a lot of what we call unfinished business from the childhood memories. Okay, but then they're very loyal to their peers. Okay, whereas the first child, they get along with the older people because a lot of times they spend more time with the parents and they become like a leader of the younger siblings because he has to be in charge. When parents go out and leave the younger children with him, he has to be the boss. So he learned how to take care of the younger ones, and it actually could be a good practice for them to become a leader someday. And according to American statistics, a lot of CEOs in the company in America are a first child, okay? And they tend to be more conservative and very, very good with the responsibility. Okay, let's move on with the youngest one. Okay, youngest like to perform for other members of the family to get attention, and they could be outgoing charmer, the airhead, affectionate one, or critical, temperamental, spoiled, impatient, irresponsible, and dependent. Okay, I mean, the thing is, we all have this mixture of different good and bad within us. And there's no such a thing as a perfect person. We are all tainted with sins. We have all kinds of flaws. And you have to realize that within us, they're always good and evil. Okay? You cannot say, he's good all the time or he's bad all the time. I mean, it's a mixture of good and bad. Okay? Because of the fall. Anyhow, the youngest, they love to perform and they become entertainers. Why? they have to always compete with the older siblings to get the attention they need and the love they want. So a lot of comedians are the youngest one. Okay, Eddie Murphy, Goldie Hawn, and numerous comedians and actors and actresses, they tend to be youngest. And the thing is, when the youngest perform for the family or do goofy things, everybody laugh and everybody cheer. But if the oldest one does that, it just doesn't make sense, and parents doesn't approve. But the youngest one does that, everybody likes this cute youngest one goofing around and stuff. So they get more leniency, they have more freedom to do the goofy things. Okay? So another thing that we want to talk about is a cultural and ethnic background. And when it comes to cultural and ethnic background, okay, there's two different cultures. Okay, individualism culture and collectivistic culture. And let me show you the video, what they are. And we are talking about the nature part of our human factor. Okay, how our behavior is being formed, and I'm saying all this nurturing factor influence our own behavior. Okay, and cultural and ethnic background is something that you need to be aware of. Okay, let's see what it is.
The main difference between individualistic and collectivist cultures concerns responsibility. In individualistic cultures, people are responsible for themselves. People are free to do their own lives with as little interference as possible from outside. Individual rights and equality in the law, along with privacy, are essential features of these kinds of cultures. Every single individual is sovereign to themselves, and they are only obstructed when they interfere with the sovereignty of others. Because the well-being of the group is given priority over the individuals that belong to them. In collective cultures, the group is responsible for the actions of the individual, as well as their safety and welfare.
Okay, in overall, the individualistic culture are European cultures, and America is the most individualistic culture of all. And everything is boiled down to I. Okay, I do this, I do that. But for collectivistic culture, it's all about we. Okay, your identity belongs to the community that you belong to. So that's why, even to this day, a lot of Asian countries, okay, China, Vietnam, okay, Thailand, Korea, Japan, you have to belong to a group, okay, and your group pretty much dictates who you are, and that's why you need to go to certain school, and you need to born into a certain family members to climb up the ladders. That's why you sacrifice for your community that you belong to. And family is the basic unit of this cultural, holistic culture a lot of times. So this also has to do with not just East and West. It's also what they did in the past for making a living. For most of the Asian countries, it was a farming country. So when you do the farm, you have to work together with your village people in order to do the farming. It's hard to do farming alone. These days, now we have big machines for agricultural purposes. So people in Europe, like Netherlands, one person could do a huge farming, okay, yield a lot of crops, okay, just one family. But in the past, it cannot be accomplished, okay. Maybe you could just have a small farm, okay, and then do that. But still, that's why they learn to work together, okay. And also that's why we had a huge families, lots of kids, because each kids become a helper. So individualism and collectivism also dictate your behavior. If you came from an Asian country, a lot of times you realize you behave like an Asian, okay? And it was a culture that influenced you. When I first came to States many years ago, I did have a cultural shock, okay? Back in those days, we weren't really familiar with how America was like. These days, you could see other countries' life real time, right, through internet. But back in those days, we thought once you depart Korea, we won't be able to come back right away, and that was true. That's why every time you go to airport, people cry, okay, because they think that they will not be able to see their family member again if they travel to like America, to Latin America, to immigrate. So anyway, so things were different, but now, okay, you do see people who grew up in an Asian country but still live a life like a Westerner, okay, because of the internet and because of the, now transportation got so much better, if you could travel, okay, with a high-speed airplane, you could have, breakfast in Paris, and you could have lunch, okay, in California and stuff, right? So, but still, we are affected by this cultural ethnic background because, like I said, nurturing factor is something that you are born with, but at the same time, it's a time factor. You spend a lot of time with certain culture, you will be influenced by it. I have some friends who came from Latin America. They're Korean, for example, Korean Brazilian, or Korean Argentinian. And interesting thing is, people who came from Latin America, even though they are Koreans, they look like Latin American. I had one student who was born and raised in Japan, and his parents moved to Japan for business, and he was born there. And when I first saw him, I thought he was Japanese. He behaved like Japanese. even though his parents are first generation Korean Japanese, being born and raised in Japan, he act and talk and think like Japanese. And that's very common because we are influenced by our environment. Okay? Another thing, developmental stages. Okay, we're gonna spend more time next week with this child development theories. But because of the different developmental stages, you acquire different personality or different behavior, especially when you had a trauma, when you have a huge accident, and suddenly most of your family passed, and you were left alone, and you were sent to orphanage, or you were raised by your relatives or something, then because of this tragedy, your personality might look like changed, but it could be just a self-defense mechanism trying to survive in the harsh situation. Okay, and life experiences, education, self-discipline, health, some choices, and some chances. All these things influence your behavior, and also their motivation, mental attitude, and habits. They could actually change your behavior as well. So again, the key issue is how do we spend your time? So let me just review the whole thing. I'm saying, in order to become a good therapist or counselor, okay, or just a lay person who wants to relate to others, the first thing you need to know is you need to understand who you are, your identity. And then you also need to understand human behavior in general. Why people behave in such a way. Okay? So I'm trying to give you the bigger picture so that once you try to have a good marriage or be a therapist, then you have to understand the core issue of human behavior, why we behave the way we behave. And I'm saying the most critical issue that we have to overcome that creates conflicts between people is that we have conflicts because of the selfishness which came from our original sin. Being a sinner means you become selfish, you're self-centered. That causes a lot of conflict in any relationship, but especially in marriage. And also, conflict happens, I told you that it's because of the differences. But the thing is, differences was God's ordained blueprint for the marriage. Because marriage is all about being a helper to your spouse. Okay? And in order to be a helper, your spouse has to have something that you do not have. So a lot of times we marry a polar opposites. Okay? But then if you have love for one another, you could overcome the differences, and only your strength needs to come out, and your weakness will be supplemented, or you'll be supported by your spouse. That's what it is. Okay, we talked about Johari window, and we talked about behavior formula, what influence our behavior. And I say it's basically two things: something that you are born with, nature, and something which is environment, nurture. But when it comes to environment, okay, nurturing factor is all about time, okay, time factor. And when it going back to the nature factor, you have to understand how God created us, okay? Because I believe in creation and by God Almighty, that God is the one who created all of us and the universe. So if you don't know God, then you don't know your Father, okay, your Creator. And that's why you are lost. Okay, actually today I'm gonna go into the child development theories. And child development theories are fascinating, but once again, these are theories, and some people go through their life, okay, following these steps, but some are not, okay? And there's some outrageous theories as well, which is Freud's psychosexual theory. Okay, and before I go on further, I wanna show you the video about how do we learn. Okay, let's watch this first.
And I can probably persuade you that this container of water and this container of water, the same amount of water, which they do, even though they look like they do. And I left my I mean, if someone would rightly expect me to look first, it's you can fit all these things because you are far down the path of cognitive development. Your parents will be
Okay,
that this can.
let me read this. Connection is bad. Okay, here we go. Oops.
Container of water and this container of water have the same amount of, which they do, even though they don't look like they do. And just let my anglerfish and knowing you rightly first, you can figure out all these things. You are far down the path of cognitive. You'll be proud. But the time in your life, well, in our lives, would totally baffling. Of course, lots of things. The relationship with the world grows over time. Genetics and environment begin to influence our learning until the day we die. Even though we're born for cells we'll ever have, our complete brain hardware take years to live. And that's grow more complex. Study of our physical, social, and emotional, from prenatal to preteen to post is called developmental psychology. Are knowledge itself, the problem into the anchor estimating caboose that are follow a change behavior experience called MAP. Really, their personal experience of course.
Okay, sorry about the bad connection. Okay, sorry about that. Let me
And to our cognitive development.
Okay.
Our genetics and our environment before we've been born and the day same number of brains have where it takes years and networks grow more complex. So study of physical, social, our whole lives from natal to preteen to is called psychology. Who we are. It begins with the growth of knowledge, the process by which the anger made a peekaboo matter today. To follow a sequence of changes in behavior is affected differently by personal experience. Of course, there where we stand, where we walk, and we walk before we break dance. The same thing applies to our cognitive development, how we learn to think, know, remember, and communicate. And if you're going to talk about cognitive development with Jean Piaget, development psych extraordinaire. Piaget was from Switzerland, where he was kind of a kid, and after graduation, he headed to France to work on a method for children to treat minister. Piaget, younger kid, it's a certain question. Older and adult, it's like being to have a really hard time understanding that I just showed. This container had the same amount of water in it as this container, or that this coins had the same number as this. Well, Chris might have misused his childish. I theorized that it was because humans go through the stage of cognitive development and intellectual production. His main game was asking how knowledge grow. We grow and struggle with the sense of our experiences. We create schemas, mental frameworks that interpret information. Schemas are like concepts ranging from things, birds and hats and iPads, to abstract ideas of friendship and betrayal. We're constantly striving for cognitive equilibrium or our thoughts, our environments, which are always giving us new things to think about and to have new experiences through two processes that are assimilating. When we assimilate new experiences, we interpret them in terms of our existing schemas. Top has never seen a deer, but has a scheme for a horse. She makes deer she sees a she wants to fit with her understanding. But with more interaction with the world, our minds to accommodate or to experiences. So soon enough, that realizes that deer aren't just from there, she'll be able to tell the difference between baby and black beauty in no time. All of this grows with are much more complex than those steps, and Jay knew that. He was as a four-stage theory of cognitive development that describes how we learn in different phases of our lives. We call stage one the sensory motor stage, which begins at birth and continues on to about age 2. This is the time when babies experience the world through their senses and actions, touching and grasping, looking and hearing, and putting things in the mouth. From what I can tell, mostly put things in their mouth. Younger babies, they get scared around strangers, see livably in the present, have to see something to know it exists. This makes them easy to trick, if you're into that. If they experience babies that a blanket over a 6-month-old's pacifier, and they think they lack object permanence, the awareness that things exist out of sight. And yet, we develop so quickly, just a month later, that we all understand that object people disappear just because object permanence, Piaget's view, was the major piece of the sensory age. Second of Piaget's phases of development is the pre-operational stage, and it began at age 2 and carried on through age 6 or 7. The thing about kids at this age is it's all that. The pre-operational stage is marked by egocentrism, which most of the child says. Kids have a hard time imagining another person's view, so much so that if I was a kid, you asked me if I had a brother, I'd say, sure, John. If you asked if John had a brother, like, nah, I don't think so. Egocentrism, of course, never fully even to understand how the whole sibling thing works. The preparation state is also by the child's mental represent and events with words and images and pretend play with imagination. They're beginning to answer now and believe favorite bunny, Batman, or stuffed animal has feelings, opinions, possibly the intent to kiss or kill you in your sleep, depending on how the feelings. Still put kinks to work out. Piaget suggested that early in this stage, kids don't yet understand the concept of conservation. Like how 500 milliliters is the same as 500 milliliters no matter what container it's in. I also struggle with the notion of reversibility. It's hard to mentally reverse the process by which a ball, clay, flat can be rolled back into a ball. It's a concept that I'm to understand. It challenges both to do with centration, a child's tendency to fixate on just one aspect of a problem or object, like shape, contain, but during this act to begin to blossom, start forming their theory of mind or ability to understand people's feelings, perceptions, as well as their own, and also how to predict behavior. Remember when I wasn't looking? At this stage will begin to realize that while she knew that the fish is in a new place, I don't know it was moved. So I start to look for it, she'll expect me to look where it originally was, not where it was moved to. People's schools have all kinds of awesome applications, from trying to convince parents to getting an extra cookie and some assessment, to showing empathy events actually experience. And unlike children in the earlier getting on issues of centration, kids in this stage experience decentration and become able to see beyond just one aspect of an object or problems. Now, the reverse and conservation cease to be problems. The last of Piaget's fourth stage is the formal operational stage, which starts about 12 and carries us through our lives. By now, our reasoning expanding include more abstract thinking, problem-solving, hypothetical questions. Today's stage model has been criticized for simplifying things and being too rich in how it classifies certain abilities by age. Today, for example, researchers have detected these things at earlier ages than Piaget ever did, sometimes way earlier, and some types of objects have been retold. Psychology see development as more of a continuous process rather than a series of stepping stones. But even Piaget understood that his stages weren't as he made them sound. And it wasn't the only one that I'm talking about development. For instance, he got very Russian psychologist Vygotsky had some ideas of his own. While Piaget focused on how a kid by interacting with the physical environment, Vygotsky emphasized how early development is through parental instruction and interaction with social environments. He believed less in set stages and more in the idea caregiver adults provide a sort of scaffold help to higher levels of thinking and learning. Vygotsky put a lot of emphasis on language as a way of assigning meaning to things, and he also suggested his develop might actually vary across cultures. And there's room for lots of different theories here. But perhaps Piaget's greatest achievement was developing theoretical depth of concept. Kids actually think very differently than adults. This has helped a lot of parents, teachers, and were expert in new research in the field. Piaget, the only developmentalist to worry, the first, is definitely one of the most influential and relevant today. As the brain and mind develop in children, so too do their social, emotional, and moral behavior. How a child is raised and cared for can have a profound impact on their personality in life. Just look next week. This, though, you'll have to use schemas, relation, and equation to the world around us. About Piaget's four-stage period of development, including sensory motor, pre-operation, concrete operational, and formal operational periods, and about Vygotsky's theory of scaffolding. Thanks for watching, especially to all of our subbable subscribers. You are the that can live.
Okay, so sorry about the bad connection. I think my connector is going bad. I need to get a new one. Anyway, let me continue with this theory of child development. And because I listed this link, okay, you could just follow this link, and the audio was really bad and all, so you could just watch this, okay, from the YouTube directly. Alright, so how do we grow as a human? Okay, it's a subject on the child development theories. And I'm going to present to you different theories, but let me talk to you about what this theory is all about. So theories of child development help organize the pattern of development from cognition to adolescence. The stages refer to differences in children that roughly respond with age, and these stages are generally held to be discrete, clearly separated from one another, sequential and cumulative. Okay, the characteristic of given stage build up those of the previous stage, and uniform. All children go through the same stages, pretty much. And the underlying assumption is that the certain abilities exist at the same time, and the clusters of abilities is designed as a particular stage. And in summary, okay, this is important. Okay, in summary, a child's development is orderly and in sequences, uneven and unique. No two children develop at exactly the same rate, as you could see, and the result of both maturation and learning. Okay, so let me start off with the most famous and yet kind of unrealistic development theory is Freud's psychosexual theory. This is one of the most famous. Okay, and he got the fame because of this more than anything, and also the psychoanalysis. Okay, and this is what he proposed. Personality development in childhood takes place during 5 psychosexual stages, according to him, which are the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and general stages. So during each stage, sexual energy, he calls it libido, is expressed in different ways and through different parts of the body. So, okay, you could just look at the chart, but I'll read the more detailed description. So, the first stage is the oral stage, birth to 1 year. And in the first stage of psychosexual development, the libido is centered in baby's mouth. And during the oral stages, the baby gets much satisfaction from putting all sort of things in his mouth to satisfy the libido. And that's true. You know, kids put everything in their mouth to experience what it is. Okay? And thus, it is eat demands, which at this stage in life are oral or mouth oriented, such as sucking, biting, and breastfeeding. And Freud said oral stimulation could lead to an oral fixation in later life. We see oral personalities all around us, such as smokers, nail biters, finger chewers, and thumb suckers. Oral personality engage in such oral behaviors, particularly when under stress. Okay? So not everything is ridiculous. Some of the things that he talks about make sense. Okay? But he emphasized sexual desire in an unbalanced way. Okay, the second stage is anal stage, and 1 to 3 years old. And during the anal stage of psychosexual development, the libido becomes focused on the anus. The child derives great pleasure from defecation. Defecating means doing poo-poo, okay? The child is now fully aware that they are a person in their own right, and that their wishes can bring them into conflict with the demands of the outside world. Okay, for example, their ego has developed. And Freud believed that this type of conflicts tends to come to a head in potty training, okay, in which adults impose restrictions on when and where the child can defecate. And the nature of this first conflict with authority can determine the child's future relationship with all form of authority, according to him. Early or harsh potty training can lead to the child becoming an anal retentive personality who hates mess, is obsessively tidy, punctual, and respectable of authority. They can be stubborn and tight-fisted with their cash and possessions. And this is all related to pleasure got from holding on to the fetus when toddlers, and their moms, then insisting that they got rid of it by placing them on the party until they perform. Okay? I mean, good imagination, and in some ways it makes sense. Not as daft as it sounds. The anal expulsion, and on the other hand, underwent a liberal toilet training regime during the anal stage. In adulthood, the anal expulsive is the person who wants to share things with you. They like giving things away. In essence, they are sharing their fetuses. Okay, an anal expulsive personality is also messy, disorganized, and rebellious. Okay, and this is all Freud talking to us. Okay, phallic stage, 3 to 6 years old. The phallic stage is a third stage of psychosexual development, spanning the ages of 3 to 6 years, where the infant's libido, okay, which is desire, sexual desire, centers upon their genitalia as in gynomus zone, erogynomus zone, which means it's the place of pleasure. Okay, the child becomes aware of autonomical sex differences, and which set in motion the conflict between erotic attraction, resentment, rivalry, jealousy, and fear, which Freud calls Oedipus complex in boys and Electra complex in girls. And this resolved through the process of identification, which involves the child adopting the characteristic of the same parents. Okay, which is another interesting concept he talked about. So the most important aspects of this Oedipus complex of the phallic stage, okay, the most important aspects of phallic stage is the Oedipus complex. And this is one of Freud's most controversial ideas, and one that many people reject outright. Okay, I reject that too. But let me tell you what it is. So the name of the Oedipus complex derived from the Greek myth where Oedipus, a young man, kills his own father and marries his mother. Okay, and he was prophesied that he will do that. That's why he was abandoned, okay, and he didn't know his origin, he didn't know his parents, and that's why by accident or without knowing that he was his father, he killed his father and marries his mother, fulfilling the prophecy. But anyhow, upon discovering this, he pokes his eyes out and becomes blind. This Oedipus is a genetic term for both Oedipus and Electra complexes. So, in the young boys, the Oedipus complex, or more correctly, conflict, arises because the boy develops sexual, pleasurable desire for his mother. I think that's too outrageous claim. He wants to possess his mother exclusively and get rid of his father to enable him to do so. Irrationally, the boy thinks that if his father were to find out about all this, his father would take away what he loves the most, his mom. And during the phallic stage, what the boys love most is his penis. Hence, the boy develops castration anxiety. Okay, another outrageous claim by Freud. So the little boy then sets out to resolve this problem by imitating, copying, and joining in muscular dad-type behavior. And this is called identification. And this is how the 3 to 5 year old boy resolve, his complex, Oedipus complex. And identification means internally adopting the value, attitudes, and behaviors of another person. The consequences of this is that the boy takes on the male gender role and adopts an ego ideal and values that becomes superego. Okay, what is Electra complex? This is opposite for girls. So the Oedipus or Electra complex is less than satisfactory. Briefly, the girl desires the father, but realizes that she does not have a penis. Okay. So this leads to the development of penis envy and the wishes to be a boy. The girl resolved this by repressing her desire for her father and substituting the wish for a penis with a wish for a baby. So the girl blames her mother for his castrated state, and this creates a great tension. So the girl then represses her feelings to remove the tension and identifies with the mother to take on the female gender role. Okay, pretty outrageous claims, right? Anyhow, he does have this perspective, okay, and actually he became famous for this, okay, theories. Okay, number 4, latent stage, 6 years to puberty. So the latent stage is the 4th stage of psychosexual development, spanning the period of 6 years to puberty. During the stage, the libido is dormant and not further psychosexual development take place. Latent means hidden. So Freud thought that most sexual impulses are repressed during the latent stage, and sexual energy can be sublimated towards schoolwork, hobbies, and friendship. And much of the child energy is channeled into developing new skills and acquiring new knowledge, and play become largely confined to other children of the same gender. Okay. One more. Okay. Genital stage, puberty to adults. So the genital stage is the last stage of Freud's psychosexual theory of personality development and becoming a being and begins in puberty. It's a time of adolescent sexual experimentation, the successful resolution of which is settling down in a loving one-to-one relationship with one another in our 20s. And so sexual instinct is directed to heterosexual pleasure rather than self-pleasure like during the phallic stage, like doing masturbation. For Freud, the proper outlet of the sexual instinct in adults was through heterosexual intercourse. Fixation and conflict may prevent this, with the consequences that sexual perversion may develop. And for example, fixation at the oral stage may result in a person gaining sexual pleasure primarily from kissing and oral sex rather than sexual intercourse. Okay, and let me explain a little more about frustration, overindulgence, and fixation. So some people do not seem to be able to leave one stage and proceed onto the next. One reason for this may be that the needs of the developing individual at any particular stage may not have been adequately met, in which case there is frustration. Or possibly the people's needs may have been so well satisfied that he or she is reluctant to leave the psychological benefits of a particular stage in which there is overindulgence. Both frustration and overindulgence, or any combination of the two, may lead to what psychoanalysts calls fixation at a particular psychosexual stage. And fixation refers to the theoretical notion that a portion of the individual's libido had been permanently invested in a particular stage of this development. Okay. And lastly, critical evaluation of Freud's psychosexual stages and theories. Is Freudian psychology supported by evidence? Okay, so Freud's theory is good at explaining, but not at predicting behavior, which is one of the goals of science. For this reason, we call, Freud's theory is unfalsifiable, okay? Which means it can either be proven true or refuted. Okay, so for example, the libido is difficult to test and measure objectively. Overall, Freud's theory is highly unscientific, as you could imagine. And Freud may also have shown research bias in his interpretations. He may have also paid attention to information which support his theories and ignore information and other explanation that did not fit them. Makes sense, right? Okay. So let me move on. Okay, with Erikson's 8 stages of human development. Okay, Erik Erikson was a disciple of Freud, but he developed his psychosexual theories of Freud a lot further, and his theories make more sense. So, according to Erik Erikson, he described the human lifespan as a series of 8 ages or stages, and each with its own social and emotional conflicts. And according to Erikson, failure to master the task of any stage leaves unfortunate consequences that carry over to later stages. For example, an infant deals with the basic trust versus mistrust. An infant with a supportive environment forms strong attachment that positively influence future relationship with other people. An infant who is mistreated fails to form a trusting relationship and has trouble developing close ties with the people later. And I really like his theories, okay? Especially one about basic trust versus mistrust. So, as you could see, the infants, the main conflict is, can I trust the person, my primary caretaker, or she is or he is not worthy to be trusted. So he will develop mistrust. So the typical question is my social world predictable and supportive? So you could just look at the chart. Let me kind of explain this first, okay, which is the most important thing. So in adolescence, the key issue is identity. Most adolescents in Western society consider many options of how they will spend the rest of their lives. And according to Erikson, the key decision of young adulthood is intimacy or isolation. That is, sharing your life with someone else or living alone. The quality of an intimate relationship has enormous impact throughout adult's life. So if you live a full lifespan, you will spend about half your life in middle adulthood, where the issue is generativity, producing something important, okay, versus stagnation, not producing anything. If all goes well, you take pride in your success. If not, then your difficulties and disappointment continue into old age, where the issue is integrity versus despair. So let me just go through this rather quickly. So if you look at this 8 stages, okay, first stage, like I said, infant. The main conflict is basic trust versus mistrust. Toddler, age 1 to 3. Autonomous versus shame. And the question is, can I do things by myself, or must I always rely on others? Okay, that's the main question. And as a child, okay, move to the third stage, age 3 to 6. It is preschool stage, preschool child. Okay, and the main conflict is initiative versus guilt. Am I good or bad? Fourth stage, pre-adolescent, age 6 to 12. Industry versus inferiority. Am I successful or worthless? It's identity issue. And okay, the beginning of identity issue. And when the child go to the fifth stage, which is adolescent, early teens, that's when they really ask this question, who am I? So it's identity versus role confusion. And sixth stage is young adults, late teens and early 20s, intimacy versus isolation. We talked about this. Shall I share my life with another person or live alone? Okay, seventh stage, middle adults, and it's late 20s to retirement. And it's all about, will I succeed in my life, or both as a parent or as a worker? And the last stage is old adults after retirement, ego integrity versus despair. How I live a full life, or have I failed? Looking back, his own life, evaluating, thinking about how I did, how did I do my life? Was I successful? Was I a failure? You know, we ask all these questions, especially when people are old. They become reminiscent about their past, and they live with their memories. Okay, they have no future. Only future they have is they're expecting to die. That's why they are contemplating about the past, and they evaluate, was I a good person or bad person? Was I a successful or a failure? So especially because of this infant stage being basic trust versus mistrust, this is a really good theory, because according to other theories, we know that if a child or an infant to toddler stage are being taken care of by the primary caretaker, who are loving, caring, and more than anything, constantly showing a child unconditional love, the child began to develop a basic trust, okay, trust that could last forever. And then when the infant and toddler grows up, he will have a basic trust toward other people. But if the primary caretaker was abusive and also not loving, the child will grow up as mistrust anybody as a self-defense mechanism. And that's why this type of things help us to realize how we grew up. Did I grow up with a good environment? Or was I taken care of by a good and wonderful primary caretaker? Mostly it's mother and father, right? If not, maybe that's why you misbehave or mistrust the people around you, even your own family members and your spouse. So it will give us a deeper understanding of why we behave the way we behave. Okay, so that's it for today. We'll continue with this topic of child development theories. Okay, we'll start with the Piaget theory of cognitive development, which is a fascinating, very good theory as well. Okay, thank you for listening. Let's close with a prayer. Father God, we are thankful that you created us according to your image, even though because of our selfishness we misbehave and we mistrust. Now we trust you more than anyone, more than anything on this earth, in this world, and help us to develop a stronger bond with you so that we'll regain the true image of God that we lost because of the sins. Thank you again for everything. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay.